name's Jo Pratt. I'm the CEO Station Manager at Radio 4EB. I'd like to welcome you to our home here at Kangaroo Point. For those of you who don't know anything about us, I'll go into a little bit of detail, very, very brief detail, and then I'll hand over to our chairperson. Yeah, Faiza El-Higsi. I will first of all just do some quick housekeeping and then I'll do an acknowledgement. Just behind this wall are the amenities. So if you do need to, that's where you go. And if you need to leave early, if the panel is going on, I just request you go out the back way rather than in front of our speakers, if that's okay. So I just, first of all, before we do anything else, acknowledge that we are standing on unceded territory, and I would like to acknowledge elders past and present from our Indigenous brethren, and just my own personal gratitude for the fact that I am also born here and have the privilege of building a life in this country. Women in power. So we've asked some wonderful politicians and former politicians and hopefully politicians to join us today because we are going to talk about why it's really important for you to exercise your democratic right and participate in the process of voting our leaders in. I am going to hand over to Lisa Ward, who is the CEO of Eccq, and we've partnered with them to deliver this event for you, and hopefully we can get all the mics working.
Thank you, Jo. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting this evening, and thank you, Jo, and the 4EB team for hosting tonight's event. I also just want to recognise the Access team, so Jazz and Yantina and the team who have come over here at the back of the room. They've brought some information just on how to vote, so afterwards if you've got any questions for them, and if there's anyone here that isn't even a citizen at the moment, Jazz can and Yantina can assist in giving you some advice on that. So thank you guys for coming here today. And I just want to thank Nikki and the Eccq team for everything that you're doing to support community and our members, so thank you. And I just want to thank our special guests here, and Anne, I just want to especially acknowledge Anne Warner is representing Terri Butler. Terri all of a sudden couldn't make it today, but Anne has stepped in and representing the Australian Labor Party. And we've got Anna Shree here, who is a candidate for the Greens in the Senate. And we've got Olivia Roberts here, who is representing the Liberal Party. Thank you all so much for taking the time here. And I just want to thank you all as well for taking the time for attending this evening and realising that it's important to be informed if you're going to practice your democratic right to vote. So thank you all very much for coming. As Jo mentioned, my name's Lisa Ward and I'm the CEO of Ethnic Communities Council of Queensland. We're the peak organisation for ethnic communities, and we put on events like this to help empower you and to understand how you can participate within your community. I'm sure you're all very aware the federal election is very soon to take place. I'm sure you ladies are incredibly aware right now. Saturday, the 21st of May is the big day. And we all have the privilege to determine which candidate and which party will lead the country in the next term. In making the commitment to be a citizen, we all agreed to be the keepers of Australia's future, to play our role in shaping a country that we can all be proud to call home. We have families and we have loved ones that depend on us, and we are raising our children, the next generation who will shape this country. We have values that we hold dear, and we have lived experiences that have shaped our stance. So now is a time for us to get informed so we can vote to influence. Faiza. I'm just going to introduce Faiza to you. Dr. Faiza is an Order of Australian Medal holder, and it's because of the contribution that she's made over many years to multicultural Queensland and multicultural Australia. She's held roles in influential roles in state and federal government, And at the moment, she's actually the chair of 4EB, where we are tonight. She's a principal consultant on diversity and inclusion for Square Circle. She's a very busy woman. She's an advisor for the Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Council and a consulting specialist for Women of the World. Wow, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of that. And is the director for QCOS, or Queensland Council of Social Services. So thank you, Visa. I'll invite you up here to join the team.
So I'm hoping this one's working. Thank you very much. And look, it's a pleasure to be around here today. And I just want to welcome you, in my role as the chair of Queensland Ethnic Broadcasting Association and Radio 4EB. So I hope I'm going to do a little bit of a promo here. If you're a member, fantastic. If you're not a member, please become a member, because this is the only multicultural radio station, community radio station, where you, the people, make the content, run the programs. So this is part of what we want to talk about today, which is empowering communities, and in particular, empowering multicultural communities. So welcome to my panel. If I sit, will you see me? I tend to have a really short back, so let me see. Am I disappearing, or am I still? You can still see me. That's awesome. So we're going to have a really relaxed conversation, and we're not sitting close by, because even though we no longer have to do the COVID social distancing, we are aware that, we could be carriers of, is it Delta or whatever it is? Omicron. Yeah. So we are doing a bit of social distancing. Welcome, the three of you. So I'll start probably with you, Olivia. Why politics?
Well, firstly, can I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet? And I would like to thank you to the Eccq and to 4EB for organising this event. I decided to, I ran in 2019, and I decided to nominate again for pre-selection and to run as a candidate in this election, because over the last 3 years I have worked in the community, particularly obviously the Griffith community at large, but the local community where I live in Coorparoo. I became I'm a director of East Leagues Club in Coorparoo, the first female director in the history of the club. I am also on the management committee for the football team. I regularly serve patrons alcohol on game days so that I can raise money for the team, which is of vital importance with the growing number of young women and men. The growth of sport on the south side has been considerable, and the facilities simply are not fit for purpose any longer. A lot of the women don't have change rooms, and that's just unsatisfactory. So I have been dedicated to ensuring that a lot of these clubs are heard, that I participate, and in doing that, it's allowed me to meet so many people from various different backgrounds and to learn just how important sport is to mental health, and to most communities are run with community sport. And so having done all of that, I thought, well, I have a lot of energy and tenacity, and I can contribute to the community. And because I can do that, I should well seek to improve the community in which I live.
That's great. So, Olivia, you are a litigation lawyer by profession.
Yes.
Okay. So you're someone who has an understanding of law, processes of law and stuff like that. And in just this brief introduction, you have addressed a number of issues, community engagement, gender inequality, issues of inequality, and perhaps issues of representation. So these are all important, ideas or issues that we are probably here to talk about today, in particular as multicultural communities. Inequality in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of access, are quite significant in the multicultural community. So I'll come to you, Anna. As someone from a culturally diverse background, and another diversity marker is age, as someone who is quite young, and we probably can acknowledge that we have very few young people in our institutions of government, whether it's state parliament or whether it's federal parliament. So regardless of the color of your political color, I just want to acknowledge that it is exciting for us to see young people enter the fray of politics, because it's not an easy arena to be a part of. So same question, why politics?
So I probably have had a appreciation since I was very young about the impact that politics can have on your life. I actually grew up at the time when One Nation Pauline Hanson was coming to power, and even as a young person going to school, that had a big impact on me and how my peers treated me, but also just having that underlying sense that potentially people thought that you didn't belong in the community and the place that I grew up. So I think that impacted me, and also having experience with my cultural background of civil war as well, knowing that politics can have such an influential, can be so influential in your life. But as I got older, I'm a veterinarian, so obviously I'm very concerned about animals and animal welfare, but also the environment. And I felt as a younger person particularly that climate change was a really serious issue that wasn't being addressed. But also on top of that, the treatment that we've seen with refugees over the past, I guess, 10 to 20 years, even in Australia, things like that were really painful to watch, I guess, seeing that play out. So I did start thinking that having more involvement directly in politics would be a way to raise awareness about these kind of issues. So I guess that's how I eventually got into politics. Being a candidate happened more accidentally. I think I was always supportive of the parties and the policies, but you get to a point where you think, well, if the people in Parliament now, I don't think they're doing a good job, and I think that I could do a better job, so I should put myself forward. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. So, Anne Warner, I want to come to you. You're someone who entered the fray of politics and has now retired, and you were the first female minister for Queensland, for the Labour Party here in Queensland, at the state level. And you are, thank you for making the time to come and join us last minute, because Terri Butler is just covering up for Albanese, who's down with COVID. So we wish him, the best of recovery so he can enter again into the election mode. So having been there, done that, and came out of it, and I understand you are of Indian origin, but you grew up in the UK and came to Australia when you were a young woman. Is it worth it?
Can I just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Turrbal and the Jagera people, and it's a very beautiful land it is too. Yes, an impossible question. Was it worth it? I think so, but I think perhaps other people should make that judgment rather than myself. But, I mean, I don't know that... I think I've been a political tragic all my life, that I have been very interested in politics, fervently Labour from a very early age, very conscious of class, and obviously very conscious of race, given my own racial background and the treatment that I experienced in England, and perhaps more importantly, the treatment that my mother experienced as a young woman going to England. My father died when I was in India, and so she reared me, and very bravely. She knew nothing about politics at all. She was sort of more religious than political. But I watched her, and I watched her struggle to survive in post-war Britain, where, the class is... You can cut it with a knife in Britain. It's just absolutely savage. And so is racism, although perhaps not as bad as it got a little bit later on with the advent of the migration to Britain in the 1950s and 60s. So basically, I became involved. I was always interested in making things better, in creating new ways forward to try and overcome the mistakes and the misery that people had experienced in previous generations.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think in what you're talking about, you're touching on, again, issues of diversity. And it's about class, what you experience, class and race and stuff like that. And I think these are important issues for us. But also there are other factors that, everyone is party to, but they could also be linked to class. Things like, housing affordability, cost of living, homelessness, and all these other social factors that we are all party to. So I want to come to you, Olivia. I mean, you're very passionate about sport and issues of sports and supporting your local community. Perhaps I'll look at this, taking us back a couple of years. The first 6 months of, or the last 6 months of 2020, when COVID came, and we went into lockdown. The federal government did amazing things. It solved all the wicked problems, and the wicked problems were about homelessness. Homeless people were housed. Job insecurity. People were given, extra money so that they can survive. People who've lost their jobs were scaffolded. The healthcare system pulled its socks up. A lot of things happened. Childcare. Women were able, even women who've not put their kids before in childcare were given a reprieve. Childcare was hugely subsidized. And it was a moment in time where we could look at what government is doing and say, hey, these problems can be solved. They are no longer wicked problems. 2 years down the road, we're facing the same issues. All the supports and the scaffolds have been pulled back, and we're now facing, increasingly high housing prices. Probably 700,000 people lost their jobs. Huge, while the unemployment figures look okay, it's probably a lot of people are no longer registered looking for work. So I think the question is, how can we make a difference? You are saying that you want to engage in politics to make a difference. From within the party, how can you bring issues from within a party that you are passionate about?
Well, obviously, to be in the parliament, I'd have to be elected first. And if I was elected, it would be my job as the local MP to bring those issues to the forefront. I mean, I obviously wouldn't be a minister first up. I'd be very lucky if I was, and obviously people would hold me in high esteem if I was, but no, I would be a backbencher. I would work very hard for the local community, and I would raise those concerns with the government. Also, part of my job as a construction litigation lawyer involves working with various different stakeholders. I happen to work well with Joe Kelly, who is our state member. He has committed $1 million towards the redevelopment of East Leagues Club. And also, I should say, the Brisbane Tigers football stadium. East Leagues Club did not get any money. That's the club that sponsors the team. So in doing that, I have the capacity to work with other members of parliament, be it state, be it local. I work very closely with my local councillor, and that is part of making sure that our country it operates to the very best level that it can. If we don't have all levels of government working together, we can't expect different outcomes. And I know that I have the capacity to do that, and that's exactly what I would do. That's
great. Thank you for that. I guess the other thing for me is women in Parliament, and I'm really happy to have a panel of women here. What's the Liberal Party's position on, say, gender quotas or something like that. What's the track record of the Liberals with women in politics?
Well, in my case, for instance, I held senior positions in my own area of the party for a number of years, and through that I've built up a good level of respect, I'd like to think, within my party. Our party does not, it doesn't require or maintain quotas. Other parties do that, ours doesn't. I know that I have got where I am today through sheer and absolute hard work and never ever giving up, and I've never ever let anyone tell me otherwise. So it's a lot of determination on my part, and I'd like to think that that sets an example to people that think that they could not possibly do what I do. If I can do what I'm doing, anyone can, and it's all about getting involved and making your voice heard.
That's good. So, Anne, I want to come to you because you've been into politics, and I want to get a sense of the Labour. I want to get. So it's Anna and Anne, right? Anne, with an E. Yes. So I want to talk about, the issue of gender inequality in politics. And Olivia said she worked really hard. And this is something that I hear all the time. If you want to be with us, you've got to work really hard. And this could be a deterrent for some people, Do men work really hard to get to where they want to be or where they should be? Do women have to work doubly hard? Just give me a sense of your journey.
Well, I mean, I was in the... I got elected at a time when the Labor Party was not employing quotas to elect women. I was sort of lucky in many ways in that I presented, I think, a very left-wing perspective in the electorate, in South Brisbane, what was then Kurilpa. And it was full of young, energetic lots of students, lots of Aboriginal people, lots of migrants, a very mixed electorate. And I think that what I represented was a different way, different from the usual male, white politician that people had become used to in Queensland. And also, it was at the time of Eccq Peterson. Yeah. So there was a lot of repression of virtually everybody. It was really, you'd wake up in the morning and think, what on earth is he doing now? Who is he going to attack? So there was a great sense of the need to rebel, to create something new, to create a different way. And I think people responded in that to me, and I unexpectedly, in my view, got elected in what was then Kurilpa, because a whole load of people from all around the city came to work on my campaign because it was a specifically openly left female feminist agenda that I was representing, and I got in, luckily or unluckily, as I felt on the night. But we then worked, and my comrade Norma is with me tonight. We worked long and hard to get quotas, and I think Norma was on the national executive of the Labor Party at the time when Paul Keating amazingly said, "I support quotas," and all the opposition amongst the blokes just sort of fell away, and we got it. And I think that the proof in the pudding is now the composition of the federal parliament. The main female representation comes from the Labor side of politics, not from the other side. And we've had a lot of debate recently, not just about women in political power, but women in power in general. The Christine Holgate scandal, the treatment of women and the sexual, the ignorance and the ignoring of sexual attacks on women, the excuses that have been perpetrated by the current government. all this represents a situation where women within the dominant government party are not in a position of power, and a lot of them have said so. In many ways I don't agree with their political position, but on the question of feminism, a lot of them aren't bad. It's just that they haven't achieved that breakthrough moment that we achieved. What was the date? 94, in 1994. So I think they will achieve that because, or maybe they will do it by sheer example of the fact that women candidates are actually more successful than men in a lot of cases. It has become popular to promote women because you get better electoral results from that. And so for a range of reasons, I think that situation will change, and maybe they can get away with not having affirmative action, but the need to promote and defend and support women in a whole range of areas, political and business and social life, is absolutely necessary for an equal society.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So Anna with an A, I'm coming to you. And again, I just want to stay for a little bit on the issue of gender inequality. The Greens party tend to be looking at their numbers and the percentages of diversity and multiple diversities at the federal level is quite significant. Why is that?
I think it comes down to the party values particularly, but also the efforts taken to provide a platform for those people of diverse backgrounds and recognising the challenges that those people have faced in getting to where they are. So it's not always just about hard work. People face multiple barriers in terms of education, class, which has been mentioned, the financial capacity to be involved in politics and run as a candidate. I know that I can speak more from a Queensland perspective rather than nationally, that there is often a sense of how can we improve the diversity of the party and also of our candidates. So I think having that recognition as a party that this is something really important. I know personally that I'm really proud of Jordan Steele-John, who's one of our youngest senators, who was the first disabled person to be in Parliament. And I think that has had a huge benefit for the disability community in having an advocate actually in Parliament who can speak directly from personal experience. And similarly, Mehreen Faruqi, our senator, being the first Muslim woman elected to Parliament. And that was also really only very recently. So I think having that recognition and awareness, we don't have quotas as such at present, but I think having that conscious effort all the time, even often when parliamentarians are retiring, that they make efforts to look for diverse candidates as well in the pre-selections. I think that has a huge impact. And even culturally in the party, I think everybody can always do better, but even in our state council meetings, which happen quite a few times a year, for example, we have someone recording the times that men and women are speaking, and they report back on that, at the end of the meeting or afterwards saying, look, this is how many minutes men were speaking for, this is how many minutes women or people who identify with other genders were speaking for. And I think having that awareness also makes people a little bit more proactive.
So looking at that micro, grounded level and so on. So Olivia, I want to come back to you because what you talk about is quite important in the sense that you've run in 2019, you're running now, and I think this is about leadership. Whether you get in or not. I mean, yes, you want to get in because then you can do a lot more. But when you don't get in, the frustration, how do you influence if you're not in Parliament, which is the leadership that we want to talk about. The members of Parliament, I think there is 61 in the Senate and, something like 57 or something like that. So these are small numbers, 250 all in the federal Parliament who get elected every 3 years. That's not a large number of people, and almost every electorate you have multiple people. How do people who do not get elected make a difference?
Well, firstly, I'd just like to clarify, when I said I worked very hard to get where I am, that's professionally. When I moved to Brisbane in 2012, I could not get a job with a top-tier law firm. They wouldn't even, well, they probably looked down their nose at me, but that's about all they did.
So where did you move from?
I grew up in Western Queensland, and I then went to university at JCU. I paid all of my HECS. I didn't have somebody pay that for me. And then I worked for a while in Townsville. Then I moved down to Brisbane. And that was the best thing that I could have done, because it put me in a position where I had to work right up the ladder. And then when I got there, I realised I have the capacity to make change. And now I work at it's a national law firm, and it's a very difficult job. I'm still working full-time, and I'm doing this as well. I am in a leadership position effectively, but furthermore, as a director of East, I have the capacity to. So the East Leagues Club, it gives grants to local community groups that have tax-deductible gift recipient status. It's a bit of a mouthful, and we give out grants of up to $20,000. Stepping Stone Clubhouse. There are other local groups that get those grants as well. So I can affect change, and because I've worked hard to get where I am now, I am able to do that. And whether I'm elected or not, I'm still in that position, and I'm still able to show that you can be a leader. It is about getting involved. I was not the most confident person before I started doing this. You might think, oh, well, there's a lawyer and, you know, she's obviously very sure of herself. But no, I wasn't, because I was never brought up to think that, you know what, here's everything and you know, you don't have to work hard. I know how hard people have to work. I appreciate how hard all Australians work. And so I can do that. And, you know, having mentioned before about the number of women in Parliament, on a council basis, we've got 50% women. Federally, there's more women in the Morrison cabinet than there have been under any other government, as far as I'm aware. And there are more and more women that are taking these positions up. And look, you're right. I think there are many women there that are doing a fantastic job. And sometimes, yes, it might require to be a bit louder and to be to advocate on things that other people wouldn't think to, but it's there and you can do it. And you know, I've done many other things too. I used to work at the RSPCA op shop at Stones Corner because I'm passionate about animal welfare as well. And there's all these things you can do. It's not really about getting elected. You can affect change on that front as well. But just being involved in your community, there are so many ways you can make your community better.
That's great, and I think this is one of the points that I think is incredibly important, to understand that leadership is not just politics. Yes, we go to the polls every 3 years or every 4 years at the state level to elect people who represent our views and who do the business of government. But within our own scope, there are opportunities that we can, you know, show leadership and influence change at a closer level, you know, not at a much wider global level. And I think the other thing for me that's important is just for us as multicultural communities to also understand, like we're sitting here looking at a blue-eyed blonde woman who's saying, I worked really hard. You know, I came from the West and people... Green. Yes, green eyes, not blue. So there is a difference here. So you're a little bit unlucky. So I think this is also important for us to recognize and not feel victims, because we don't want to get into the victim mentality. You know, anyone who wants to achieve has to work hard, but we're talking about the structural inequality that's embedded in the system, that no matter how hard you work, it will still be there. You know, the racism, the unconscious bias, which I think is really conscious bias, but we call it, you know, unconscious bias. Anyway, I think we'll probably talk for another 10 minutes, and then we'll open it for discussion. So sharpen your pencils, get your questions ready, so we can have a robust conversation. Anna with an A, I'll come to you here. Probably a similar question. You chose to make a difference through politics, but for young people like you, and there are many young people here, what's your advice to them? How can they make a difference, whether through politics? If somebody wants to join into politics, how did you go about it?
So in terms of how I became involved, I first joined my local branch, my Greens branch, and they're all fairly localised, covering a few suburbs. And then once you're in the branch, then we have State Council, which meets multiple times per year, where all representatives from all the branches come together. And then from then on, you can go to National Council and things like that. In terms of being a candidate, it depends on the electorate as well, but that's something where your branch will vote on people, or people put their names forward, and that is how you get elected by your branch and then stand as a candidate in that area. But for young people, I think it's not, as has been mentioned, just about being involved in politics. It's also about being aware of what's happening generally in society in your local community. Our branch at the moment is advocating strongly to protect an area of bushland from a road going through that the majority of the community doesn't want. So that's just a way that I can be involved really locally as well. And it also connects in with other things I do as a veterinarian, seeing wildlife hit by cars and things like that. It brings it back to me on a personal level as well, when I think about how these issues that seem a little bit abstract can actually affect our lives. Another thing I think that doesn't get enough attention is the impact that people can have approaching their MPs and elected representatives. So often people will start with things like a letter writing campaign or a petition, but we've seen in recent years, because of the desperation that people have around issues like, for example, refugees or homelessness, that they're actually desperate for some action and some relief, that we have seen escalation to things like peaceful protests in the street, marches, vigils, to raise attention and raise wider public awareness about these issues. One of the challenges facing younger people particularly, I think, is that often they are trying to study or work and afford rent and basically look after their needs primarily. So to have the time to be more involved can be difficult. Where I live on the Sunshine Coast, it is often like older people, even retired people, who are more involved because they have that time capacity and security. So I was really proud of the Greens policy in terms of raising the rate of social security payments so that no one's living in poverty. I was disappointed that both major parties are not increasing the rate because, as you said, when the COVID pandemic happened, we showed how much difference it made to people's lives, that they could afford food, that they could afford rent. And I think for young people, like I remember living on youth allowance, and if you have $200 a week and your rent is, $150, $180, which at the time was cheap, there's not much left, and you don't have capacity to be involved. So I think the policies that make a difference to people's lives and give them that breathing space, it actually improves our democracy because people have capacity to be aware and be involved. Yeah,
look, that's you've given us a number of options, that people could be involved in to influence. It's not just the vote, of course, is the most important one. Has anyone here not voted before? Is anyone a first voter? Oh, welcome. That's great. Watch the Senate paper. It's this this big. Yeah, but we have, I'm just going to digress a little bit. I teach Australian political institutions at the University of Queensland, and we talk about, the business of government. And the governance structure of Australia is probably one of the best in the world because the lower house, voting members in the lower house is different to voting Senate representatives. So it combines both the Westminster and the US, and that is like the best salad you could ever have. So enjoy your salad. So I'll come to you, Anne, with an E. And I'm curious, having been in politics and came out of it, how are you using that platform? Or how can one use a platform like that? Having been a previous minister, probably knowing very influential people, is it possible to use a platform like that? Or how can one use a platform like that?
With difficulty, I think. I think I have become, since I left politics, I became involved in issues that I felt passionately about, issues that inspired me interested me and spurred me on. And the issue that I became involved in was services and support for women in prison. And I've been involved with Sisters Inside for many years. Doing that, it was inspiring, and I suppose I did, to some extent, try to use the influence that I had to promote those issues and the injustices that women in prison experience. They're in there probably because of some injustice, and they are then inflicted with more injustice. And then when they come out, they're given no options or opportunities. So that was my passion. But I think that everybody has something in them that they feel really strongly about. Something, whether it's to do with your kids, or whether it's to do with the treatment of your parents, or whether it's to do with, something wrong with the road outside your house, or there are a number of issues, and obviously the environment is something that we really do have to pay a huge amount of attention to, because we're not going to have it for much longer. This is a serious existential threat that, society, people in every nation of the world have to confront. And we have not confronted it yet in Australia. And we really seriously do have to, because it's our future, it's our children's future. It is something that you can be passionate about. There are so many things that you can be passionate about, so many injustices that you may see or feel around you in the world that you can actually, talk to your friends about, try and set up some kind of structure. Join a political party if there's one that you feel reflects your feelings and aspirations. Joining any group, really, even the PNC or a number of... Be active in the community, because that is the only way forward for us as a species. And, somebody said the other day, that we're intelligent enough to know that there is a catastrophe around the corner in terms of global warming, but probably stupid enough not to do anything about it when we can. And we really do have to... these things are important, and if not us, then who?
Absolutely. So a bonus question open for all of you. Does race matter?
Yes.
And how do we deal with this?
I think it's really important for people to acknowledge, especially people that don't feel that they're a part of a racial minority, that it's not just the overt racism or people calling things out in the street, but it is those structural issues as well, and the personal biases that people hold. And that's why I think our Greens policy platform on racism, I actually printed it out the back if anyone wants to have a look, is really strong, because it talks about actively being anti-racist. So it's not enough to say that I'm not racist. You've actually got to be active and assessing your biases all the time and looking at the structures and the positions of power that you hold, and think, how can I cede power to other people who may not have who have not had the same power and opportunities that I've had? And be constantly looking at that, because we know that race affects people and racism affects people profoundly. Like, I have a master's in public health, and you can look at people, particularly people of racial minorities, living, when they live in an area where they are in the minority, it affects their health because of that stress that people are under, constantly potentially feeling judged or feeling that they're not included, having extra challenges, at work or even in community groups. And as someone who's grown up in Australia, I can say that I was born here, I speak English perfectly, but it's difficult to know because you don't know sometimes if something is due to structural racism. So I think it's insidious that way because it eats away at you. So I do think we need to acknowledge it and speak about it, and people need to be really active personally in constantly addressing that. And the same goes for other types of discrimination as well, ableism, people being homophobic and things like that as well. We need to be looking at that and thinking about it from a structural and systemic level. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Can I just say something about the race thing? It's an amusing but a horrible story, really. But some years after I stopped being a minister, and we were Deb Kilroy, who runs Sisters Inside, and I were addressing a parliamentary Senate committee, and they were meeting in the Queensland Parliament. And the committee knew that one of us was a former minister of the government and another one was a former prisoner. And when we got there, and they said, basically introduced ourselves, and I said, I was a minister, and they said, Minister? Minister of what? Oh, minister in the Queensland government. Oh, which government? The Queensland government. In which parliament? This parliament that we're sitting in now. And it took ages, and finally somebody, they obviously assumed that the blonde-haired woman was the minister and the black woman was clearly, the prisoner. That's just an example of, and I was, 60 years of age, been a minister, done a whole load of things, but race doesn't just evaporate. It doesn't just go away with any kind of status that you may or may not achieve, because the bigotry and the ignorance which underlies racism is just there. And it's horrible.
Yeah, so...
and it's internalised by those of us
Yep.
who have the so-called problem of race.
Yeah, so probably Olivia, as the only person in the room, how can people who've got privilege because of who they are, not necessarily because of the hard work that you talked about, just by being who they are, white, male, all these tick boxes, how can they enable others? How can we start chipping at this structural inequality? How can we open the door for others so that, they can join us and we can do something together?
Well, it's about making boards more culturally diverse, for instance. We're undertaking a review currently at Leagues Club as to how we can make our board more culturally diverse. And also, being involved in the rugby league community, it is very culturally diverse. This electorate is very culturally diverse. And I think that's something we should all be very proud of. It's a great place to live in. And look, I could not possibly understand what people who, as you've just said, I wouldn't attempt to possibly. I think that's awful and it's disgraceful. Having grown up in Western Queensland with many Aboriginal kids and people of other different backgrounds as well, it was just simply very normal for me. I would never ever think that would be what you would deal with. So it's just disgraceful. But the way to get past that is to make boards, workplaces. Most workplaces now have requirements that they be more culturally diverse. You have to. It's just something that all boards and most workplaces do, and I encourage it. Now, conversely, being small and being youngish looking, I'm 41 for the record, but I've had people look at me and think, "Oh, you're a little girl. You couldn't possibly be a candidate." I've had years ago when I would go to presentations with male partners of law firms. I had people think that I was the partner's secretary. I had men, builders, put their arm around me because they thought that was entirely acceptable because I was there for, just to go along for show and tell. And that affected me for a while, to be perfectly honest, because I thought, how am I supposed to, get through it? But I did, because I've built up a very thick skin over time as a result of that. Now, that does not happen anymore in law firms. If it did, I'm sure someone would be, well, you wouldn't have them as a client. And if a male lawyer conducts themselves like that now, they're shown the door. It's absolutely unacceptable. Having said that, being involved in politics, I have only ever been treated well. I've never experienced any inappropriate conduct, but I'm very well supported by a number of excellent senators in Queensland and other ministers that visit. So again, I couldn't possibly understand, but I think it starts with making our boards and making our workplaces more diverse.
Yeah, so I do agree with you on the boards thing. So boards there are a number of boards. There are government boards, there are private sector boards, and then there are the NGO, the not-for-profit. So things like Eccq, Ethnic Communities Council, 4EB, these are the not-for-profit. And we, on a yearly basis, we have annual general meetings where people can propose, put their names, they become members, they put their names, they get voted, and so on. And the not-for-profits are quite easy to get into, but even when we look at the not-for-profit, we find that, the ethnic ones are ethnically diverse, and the non-ethnic ones, might have the symbolic person if the chair of the board is, aware of representations and things like that. Government boards are much more difficult. I was part of the Queensland campaign of the 50-50, increasing the number of women on boards. And to demonstrate that, you have to walk the talk, I started applying for government boards. And I applied for health boards because, especially in the Metro South health region, because that's the most diverse space. And I applied for 3 years consecutively, was not even interviewed. So I met a member of the board, and I said, look, I'm part of this campaign. I want to demonstrate to people, and I am not even interviewed. And the response was like, oh yeah, it's very competitive. Very competitive. So automatically, as a multicultural person, you fall below that threshold. So it's the bias, the conscious bias and the unconscious bias about these sort of things. I've been told that I've got probably a couple of minutes, very quickly. What keeps you awake at night? What excites you? Just very quickly.
Well, currently what excites me is the young, enthusiastic team that I have around me. It's a very difficult job to do, working full-time, being a director of East and being a candidate. And I have a wonderful sister that's helping me. I have Tabitha and Kwong, and they're amazing. They're what keep me excited and continuing just to give my best every day. What keeps me up at night could be any number of things. I've never slept well my entire life because of the stress of work, quite frankly. Look, I could name a number of different work matters that keep me up awake at night at the moment. Look, occasionally it's a cat that decides to play fetch in the middle of the night. He's a lovely boy, but he likes to play fetch with mice. Toy mice, not real ones, toy mice. Yes, that's what keeps me awake.
That's great.
So probably what keeps me awake at night would be climate crisis, ecological collapse, but also just extreme injustice, knowing that in Australia we have children in refugee detention right now that have spent their whole lives basically in detention. I think that is just outrageous. It's disgusting in a wealthy country like Australia. So it is issues that keep me awake, I think. What excites me would be that I think as a younger person, like I've just literally grown up with crisis after crisis, climate crisis, wars, refugee crisis, now the housing crisis, pandemic. Like, it's basically like it's so bad from my perspective that we have nothing left to lose and we have everything to gain. So the only way forward is that we just keep going, because there's no alternative. Like, you can't give up hope. You just have to keep keep going. And I think in the action of striving to like hold on to the things that are important to you and your values, I think that's where my excitement comes from.
I think that what excites me most is watching my grandkids grow up and beginning to have ideas that I can discuss with them. One of them has just gone to university for the first time this year. And just talking to her about ideas and what you said earlier, Fazia, about the opportunities that we had a couple of years ago to actually clean the slate, to actually bring some justice to our society. There are ways to do it. There's a possibility of basic income. There are so many ideas about how we can reform the situation that we are in, both from the climate perspective, but from the pandemic perspective, but most importantly, perhaps, from the equality perspective for all of us, to deal with racism. And watching my grandkids struggle with these ideas as they're growing up is probably what excites me more than anything else.
That's great. Thank you all very much. Please thank members of the panel, Olivia Johnston, Anna Shree, and Anne Warner.